Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
Well, I'll use something we just had here, which is just be prepared. There's one thing about being prepared about the topic, the keynotes you're doing, your posture, things like that. But it's all about the tech. There's no lack of tools. I think, a lot of people use a lot of different web conferencing tools. So always make sure you test beforehand, check your devices, your Bluetooth, make sure you're checking updates. There's a lot of technical difficulties that can occur. So that's a big one I tell our sales team.
Hello, Sales Nation. My name is Will Barrett, and I'm the host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most downloaded B2B sales show. On today's episode, we have the pleasure of speaking with the legend Russell Wurth. He is the VP of Worldwide Sales Enablement over at Showpad.com. And we're touching on sales enablement in this episode as we dive into the topic of what can we do on a video call? Because we're now all of a sudden all doing video calls, right? What can we do in a video call to gain the buyer's trust? Everything that we talk about in this episode is available in the show notes over at salesman.org. And with that said, let's jump right into it. Okay, so today's episode, we're going to look at what we can do on a video call to build trust. Clearly, we're all doing video calls, maybe all of a sudden for some of us with COVID, and it's not going to change anytime soon. So before we get into the crux of the conversation, which is what we do on the video call itself, is there anything that we need to do to build trust in either the moments or the hours leading up to a video call to make our video calls more effective as we run through them?
Well, I'll use something we just had here, which is just be prepared. There's one thing about being prepared about the topic, the keynotes you're doing, your posture, things like that. But it's all about the tech. There's no lack of tools. I think, a lot of people use a lot of different web conferencing tools. So always make sure you test beforehand, check your devices, your Bluetooth, make sure you're checking updates. There's a lot of technical difficulties that can occur. So that's a big one I tell our sales team. The other one, as they're testing, is to make sure that they test their keyboard. Because a lot of times if the rep is taking notes, I've had this happen. People call on me and they try to sell to me and they're taking notes directly into their CRM. And it's very distracting because the microphone is right there on the keyboard. So I encourage our sales teams, look, let's go back and use these tools that I've used since the dawn of time, pen and pencil, pen and paper. Take notes that way. It shows that you're really paying attention and you're really engaged. So as you're preparing, just have a notepad, have a pen there. Be very handy as you're preparing, and use some sticky notes for things that you want to talk about. Put them around your screen so it helps you focus and stay in the moment in building trust.
It's funny you mentioned that. I can't really share who it is yet, but we had someone in this studio doing some new content that's kind of going on our platform, but it's not really anything to do with me. And I was in the office next door, and I've got an expensive, stupid mechanical keyboard that's all clicky clacky, and it was a nice experience to type on. There's never anyone usually in this building with me as we're recording. And you could hear my clicky-clappy keyboard, not just, I wasn't even in the same room, one room removed, and you could hear it in our new potential maybe hosts' content. And it wasn't until after the fact, and it was really distracting for the viewers who are kind of beta testing some of this new content that we're producing. So writing on a keyboard that's right in front of the microphone must be even worse for everyone involved. So that's a common, not common, that's common sense, right? And obviously a lot of people, myself included, don't always leverage common sense, especially when maybe it's a big deal, it's a big call, there's a bit of adrenaline going, you're excited for it, things like that can go amiss. Is there anything other, as we're touching on this, anything other common sense wise that we should be doing before we pick up the virtual call, before we pick up the video call?
Back to testing, bring up the apps that you're using, do that record so you can maybe hear that clickety clack of the mechanical keyboard, but also take a look at your surroundings and kind of be mindful and aware of what's going on beyond you, because people are going to look at you, but like I'm looking at you, Will, I'm seeing the great cartoon characters. I'm sure there's some stories there. Make sure you know the stories about the things that are behind you as people are looking beyond you into things that may be at your wall, a picture, and have some things up there. If you want to have a story, do that. Or have, I've got a little corner where I've got a whiteboard. Sometimes I'll put a clever message back there that I want people to pick up on. And so have some things there that are mindful, intentful distraction, but also be aware of some of those unintentful distractions. If you have a dog bowl or a blanket or something like that, try to clear that out and really make sure that you can engage personally with people for the things that they might see that's in your office. I'm exposing you my home here. I'm in Colorado in the States, and you may ask me something. I've got to be at the ready that you may inquire about what's going on there and what's in that environment. So that's just part of practicing, kind of be prepared and just know what's going on and what they may ask you about.
So are you ready for this transition? You mentioned backgrounds. Yes. What about backgrounds on video? So this is something that I am I will not record with people when they have a weird Zoom or Skype background on the podcast. I think it not necessarily looks unprofessional, but from our video production side of things, it's annoying, and it's annoying to the viewer. So should salespeople be using either a corporate clean or blurred background, or should they be even going as far as branding the background and making it even look cheesy or attention grabbing? Because I think that factors into the trust elements of our video calls. What's the best practice for video backgrounds?
It's to each his own. Really, the answer depends, because I'd say, again, be mindful of it. If you're going to use a background, make sure you're not just copying something that's a clever video background that the sales engineer gave you, that you have a story behind it. Or if you have a static background of the corporate office, have a story behind that, hey, we just moved into new offices or got a fresh coat of paint. This is kind of where I wish I was. So again, have a story behind those things. I'm okay with folks using it. Again, it's a conversation piece. It's a lot like a tie. Sometimes people stick with the corporate ties that are, very well done. Sometimes you have a fun tie that's Star Wars themed or holiday themed, and you're going to have a story about it. It lets you expose your personality a bit. So just make sure you're open and welcome to describing that to somebody, and you're not just doing it haphazardly with no intent.
Sure. So you mentioned the word story a few times in the kind of 30 seconds we've been recording. Russell, how does story tie in? Clearly, it's on top of your mind here. How does story tie into video conversations? And do we have opportunities to storytell on video that we perhaps don't have the opportunity to when we're just on a standard phone call?
Oh, absolutely. So sales is all about storytelling. I'm excited about that, because the way you develop a personal connection is with storytelling about our experiences, about our vision, about our desires, or about, where we can have some joy and opportunities. It dates back to the caveman days. When we were in front of a cave wall drawing pictures. We still do that today with whiteboards. We just can't do it in person. So we want to tell stories. We like them. And this is one of those things you need to practice. So I'm all about having stories about a solution, a problem, your personal approach, some things going on. These are all just little elements to help build trust. And so this is where sales enablement comes in. It's always making sure that we can enable sales to have those stories at the ready, things that they practice. It's not that I'm going to tell you a story, Will, that I've pitched, that I practiced and I'm going to pitch you something, but I've got personal stories, 30 seconds, 60 seconds long for relevancy. And for video, it's impactful because you can use your hands. You can really showcase how you really believe in those things, or grab that virtual whiteboard, do some annotations, not just walk people through slides, but bring up something as a visual representation and take them through that journey, draw on there, make it their own so they can kind of see that experience themselves. And so it's really where I'm excited about using video instead of just audio calls.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, thank goodness we all have, ubiquitous broadband in a lot of these areas that we can do video calls and kind of get to know each other a little bit more personally. Seeing the facial reactions, that's the other thing. Be willing to read those reactions, but also share your reactions with folks. I think that's the key. It's a little bit of performance art that a lot of us aren't used to. I'm an engineer in background. I'm not trained in any acting or theater. It's just something I've done naturally. So I encourage others to do that as well. Express yourself, but read the expressions of others on video.
Sure. So we'll get into active listening and understanding the more subtle communications that go on in a conversation in a second. But you said something there which excites me, and that is whether it be a physical whiteboard sat behind you. What I use in a lot of our video content is a iPad that I draw on, which then we use the magic of video editing to get on the screen with a shot of myself or looking beautiful. Not necessarily myself looking beautiful, the screen looking beautiful, and the video assets. And we've done A/B testing on this on both YouTube, are using it in with our own platform and measuring attention span of the viewers watching the video itself, and just using any whiteboard activity, just jotting down random words, drawing shapes, nothing that the average person could just pick up in 2 seconds. Not doing anything particularly sophisticated, made a dramatic, almost doubled our retention rate on both YouTube videos and the videos, training videos within our salesman.org platform. So let me ask you this, especially from a sales enablement standpoint, where perhaps we want to be able to document things. I don't know how you document something that you want to draw, or whether there's a process of visually showing content within a presentation, within a sales meeting, within a video call. How do we implement whiteboard? How does the average person who doesn't have all of the gadgets and video switching and stuff that we have here implement a whiteboard into a Skype or video call or Zoom call? We'll start there, and then I guess we'll dive into how we can document what works, what doesn't, and how we can perhaps use sales enablement to refine some of this as well.
Yeah, it comes back to preparing and ensuring you have that story. And again, the best thing I think you touched on it is have some core visual in the background. It could be a PowerPoint, could be a architecture diagram or some visual. And I encourage our sales team, at Showpad, we're heavily on the iPad. So I encourage our sales team have these things at the ready because salespeople are not designed to be in front of a laptop all day long. I was a developer for a long time. I know your clickety clack mechanical keyboard. I use that judiciously. I can be in front of a screen coding, from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. But salespeople can't do that. They're meant to be storytelling and kind of getting up and getting interactive. And so that's the thing. Part of storytelling is have a draw on something like that. Using a tool like Showpad that you can bring up a slide, do some annotation, save that, and share it with a customer. But again, it comes down to do a little bit of practice, understand the components of the tech. How do you make sure that your iPad can join a meeting? How can you share something and do that drawing? But it's again a way to make it a little bit more real and not so mechanical and rehearsed that, yeah, well, I know I've designed 45 slides for you and I'm going to take you on a PowerPoint journey. Nobody wants that. But let's go on a conversational journey. Maybe I've got 1 or 2 setup slides, but for the rest of that, let's just have a real conversation. I think you said it best. Let's pretend like we're down at the pub, having a pint, and we're talking about something like that. And no better way to do that than to draw. So worst case, you just have the pen and paper at your side, you're drawing here, and you kind of show it on the screen. But even better if you can kind of get that tablet hooked up there. And always talk to your friendly enablement person. I'm sure they've got some tech that can help you get there. That's what enablement's for. It's to help the sellers sell more faster. So we're here to help you do things like that in the sales world.
Yeah, and to be very practical, Zoom has a whiteboard built into it. You just click a button and the whiteboard pops up, and you can use your mouse, and you can also type on a keyboard on there as well. You can also just share your screen, and there's tons of real-time whiteboard apps, web apps that you can just use in your browser. I'll leave a link to some of these in the show notes as well. And then, of course, Zoom, I don't know how they phrase it, but on Skype, you can have basically dual screens. So you can share both your webcam, your screen, and then an additional monitor, which is what we do. And I think you're alluding to yourself there, Russell, where you can use an actual tablet to do some of this drawing as well. So there's loads of options. I'll put some of these, the practical steps of this in the show notes over at salesman.org for this episode. So I feel like this is an incredible way to build trust because it creates a conversation. But is there any way other than we've touched on, we may come back to this, storytelling, whiteboarding to have a conversation, to make the conversation dynamic? Is there anything else that we need to do to very specifically build trust within a call? And I guess what I'm asking is, how do we build trust so we can separate ourselves from the pesky salesperson who's just take, trying to shove a pitch down someone's throat, and what we want to be perceived as by the buyer, which is a consultant, someone who has value, someone who's worth having a conversation with? How can we separate ourselves? Is there any other tools or tricks that we should, not necessarily tricks, tools or not even techniques? Is there anything else we should be doing, Russell? I'm mincing my words here. Any other things we should be doing to separate ourselves from pesky salesperson to someone who's valuable enough to want to have a conversation with?
I think the biggest thing is we got to separate ourselves as a salesperson from a commercial. Anybody can see a commercial online. You click that, you kind of watch it, and then you're multitasking. And a lot of people can end up doing that too. If we're selling, our prospect might not be engaged. Yeah, they might have it up there watching the pitch, watching the demo, but they're probably working on an expense report or emails or Slack or Skype or something like that, responding to chats. So we got to get them interested. We got to get that hook early on. And TV shows do a fantastic job of this. And that's just getting that rapport early on. And so something I've done, we haven't rehearsed this, Will, so I'd hit it up. If I'm selling to you, I'd ask you, great, hey, before we start, let's talk about something regional, something that might be going on in the UK if I'm following Premier League football, or something that resonates with everybody, which is food. Will, what's your favorite food to cook or eat? I'd ask you that question. What is your favorite food to cook or eat?
My favorite food, and I'm allergic to dairy, is pizza. So it's both a blessing and a curse, right?
Yeah. And now, is that to cook or to eat? Because that's your favorite food. Do you like making it or do you like getting it?
So I see what you just did there, but I like cooking it. I don't have a pizza oven, but we have a a pizza stone that we can cook on within a normal oven. So yeah, I love cooking it as well.
And then this is the kind of thing that's a universal question you can ask anybody. Everybody eats. Most people either get things takeout, go to a restaurant, or they make it themselves because they want a lot of control. And so now all of a sudden we've got some rapport. I learned a little bit about you, and I can try to tell some stories and how that resonates and say, look, Will, if I'm selling you a product, you're going to want a lot of control over that because you don't want somebody to put some dairy in your product that you can't have. You've got to have control. Maybe you like the thick crust or thin crust. You like to make sure it's just right. So I want to make sure as I'm doing my storytelling throughout a 30-minute pitch or a 30-minute sales call, that I can bring back that and have that relevance. So it's not just about me. I can always bring back to a pizza analogy that if we set that rapport up early on in the conversation, I've got something foundational that you're always going to link into there. I may be mentioning pizza too much, that you get hungry, you want to go get a bite for lunch or dinner, but at least I've got you listening because you care about pizza, and I want to make you care about my solution or my story as much as you care about pizza. But I can only do that if I've got that rapport and I can get some resonance with you of something that's relatable. So that's another tip I do with some of the video calls, is just telling sales, find something there to get that relevance and resonance, to get rapport and get somebody to lean in and really listen.
So what you did, Russell, was, I'm sure you appreciate this, and the audience will have seen, and they may even done this a few times, but it's quite sophisticated. There's multiple layers of communication that you did there, and then tying it back to the product, back to kind of an anchor point that we've both agreed on that there's rapport over. And we could probably have a 5-hour conversation just about the dynamics of that. But is there a way to practice some of this? Because, and the reason I ask is, some salespeople listen to this might be able to do this really well over the phone because they've been doing it for 20 years. Some salespeople might be brand new and they can see what they want to achieve, or when they hear it and they do it occasionally, they go, "Oh, that was perfect," but they're not capable of just quite yet of repeating it. Is there a way to, and there might be people who are great at all of this, but I've never done it on a video call. I want to challenge themselves and want to improve their game just in general. So is there a way to, other than just role plays, which is probably the answer that we all know, but we all try and avoid, is there a way to practice some of this if we are, again, new to doing this over video?
No, there absolutely is. And I'll turn into a bit of a commercial here, but that's what we're trying to do at Showpad, because it's a lot like golf, or even making pizza. If you want to get good at something, you got to do it over and over again. That's really where mastery comes in. And so that practice is good. While you can record yourself and watch yourself do it, it's even better if you've got somebody that's an expert, either your sales manager, your sales coach, reviewing that and providing some tips, or somebody that's your sales enablement professional, again, reviewing that and helping, giving you some of those tips that might be a quirk, might be a habit that you're doing, that you shouldn't be doing, or missing something that you should add, or really re-encouraging and enforcing some good habits that you have. And so it's one thing to do it and have these tools like a Showpad that can make sure that we set up a scenario, like you said, a role play, and do some of these rehearsals and have somebody evaluate it. And I've seen reps do this where they're really, really good at practice, but for whatever reason, when it comes live, then all of a sudden they don't do so well. And so you want to make sure you're recording some of these calls. Like if this was a sales call, we'd want to make sure the manager can review our live sales call and see how that was done. So that way you're not just doing it well in practice with a review, but how are you doing it consistently, repeatedly with live customers and different customer types. So a lot of these video recording tools are really, really handy to at least record it, transcribe it, create that library of what good looks like, and some coaching tips to help improve that. Whether you're making pizza or playing golf, you got to be out there doing it over and over again if you really want to get good.
Sure. And is there any way to accelerate that process other than recording more, viewing more, and hopefully getting more coaching from sales management? Let me rephrase that. How can we do this independently? Perhaps we've got a real shocker of a sales manager who's not coaching us whatsoever. They're off doing something else because there's so much admin to do because of COVID shenanigans. Is there a way to accelerate our own process of learning here? Is it just a case of watching more, reviewing more?
It's the watching and reviewing, and find other peers. It doesn't always have to be your boss, your manager that can do that coaching. You might be able to find somebody that's pretty clever in marketing. Again, just because somebody doesn't do well recording themselves doesn't mean they couldn't be a peer reviewer. I'd be surprised if you're in sales, you couldn't find somebody in marketing that wouldn't be willing to listen and watch your videos. While they can't record it, they can at least tell you some tips and tricks about things you ought to think about, because they might just have a different eye. So reach out to somebody on your marketing team, events, campaigns, whoever that might be. We've got a lot of friends here in sales and our marketing peers that they'd love to at least provide some of that feedback. So you can find a coach just about anywhere. And again, a lot of it is, can we build that resonance? Can we get a message out there? Can we get somebody smiling and nodding and saying, yes, I want to learn more? And so lots of other peers that are out there. So just get those other people other than you that can understand what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it and provide the context.
Sure. And I know from my own perspective, and I get lots of feedback from the audience on this show, if I say something stupid, do something stupid, there's a flood of emails and comments that come in on the back of this. And that's really, and for the audience Sales Nation, that's really valuable for me, because I think things are going well and think things are going great. And it's only until you get that outside feedback. It's like, I guess I'd put it like, I can write what I think is a great blog post. It has the structure of a great blog post. It seems like it's going to be an excellent piece of content, and there will be 50 really obvious spelling mistakes in there that I just become blind to. I feel like a lot of salespeople become blind to, because especially you're picking up the phone, especially if you've got you're doing a lot of inbound and you're not doing, or even if you're doing a lot of outbound and you're saying the same things over and over and over. One or two little tweaks, especially when you do this at scale over the course of a year, 5 years, or your career, one little tweak at the beginning can make a massive difference later on. Okay, so with that all said then, Russell, what do we do when we're on the call? We've built that little bit of rapport. We've perhaps anchored it to something like, your analogy here of the story of the pizza, me loving pizza, and that's a callback that we can do throughout the conversation, and even in an email later on, there could be a GIF of a pizza in there that identifies it as or personalizes that content. So I love this. What can we do other than using whiteboards? What can we do throughout the video call to make sure that the buyer, I guess we're moving away from trust now, but actually pays attention to what we're communicating with them?
This is a real challenge too, because we really need to turn your video on, encourage others to turn their videos on, and not to be embarrassed. I think you touched on something that we want everything to be perfect. We're not making a movie here. We're just having a conversation. And so just like you mentioned, if we're at the pub having a pint, I'm not going to rehearse everything I'm going to say with you at the pub. There's going to be some ebbs and flows and some errors, and we have to accept that. And I think showing a little bit of vulnerability and showing that you can accept that vulnerability, encourage people to turn on their camera. Don't worry what you look like, so I can read the audience. I can see if I've got 2 or 3 people in there, and I can call on somebody, and I can see, okay, I've got a nodding head in here. I'm going to get them engaged. Or I've got somebody that's clearly distracted. Maybe it's the dog or the kids or the postman dropping off the package. I'm not going to hassle them right now. But at least I'm going to try to bring as many people into the conversation as possible by reading the face and say, Will, you're nodding your head there. Did that make sense? Obviously it did. What's compelling there? And then can I get one of your peers engaged? Can I get somebody else to chime in? And again, how can I orchestrate the conversation? It's not about me controlling. Don't need to talk. I need to get other people talking around the topic I'd like as a seller, which is my solution to solve their problems, and get that resonance among as many people as possible.
Is there anything we can do from the perspective of, because we're almost being somewhat selfish here, of what we can do as salespeople, what we should be focused on, and this big shift of remote sales and woe us, the salespeople, everything's changed for us and we've got to adapt. But clearly, buyers have changed as well. A lot of them are working from home. A lot of them are doing video from home, as you alluded to then, of there's the postman, there's the dog, there's the kids running naked in the background. And for some reason, the kids are 32. I don't know why they're naked in the background. There's all this stuff going on. Is there anything that we should be cognizant of for the buyer's perspective, other than obvious things, common sense things like 32-year-old kids wrestling in the background naked? Other than that, take that off the table for 1 second, Russell, is there anything that buyers are doing differently from home that they wouldn't do on a video call or a normal call when they're in the office?
I think you touched on it earlier, which is this expectation that since we're not in person, we're on video, we've got to be perfect. And I think the more that, again, just break the ice, be a little bit vulnerable, show that vulnerability. If the dog breaks down the door, kind of accept it, acknowledge that, and let people know, look, we're all human here. We all have similar challenges. And so as a buyer, we've got to make people feel comfortable. And I think oftentimes I've just seen this on video with customers that aren't on video a lot buying, or sellers that haven't done a lot of video selling. They're just not comfortable because they feel like, okay, lights, camera, action is going to be completely scripted, needs to be perfect. It might be recorded. So understand, acknowledge, and just accept some of those mistakes and vulnerabilities, and we'll all be fine. As long as you're professional and you're not doing, like you said, running around, exposing yourself, you're going to be okay. And again, making sure that our customers feel most comfortable as well. And I think that just starts with sharing a bit of vulnerability yourself.
Sure, that makes total sense. I guess what we give on a call, we're likely to receive back, right?
Absolutely. And you and I talked about it before I joined, a bit of vulnerability. I had the technical challenges, which embarrasses me. I'm a technologist. So how I couldn't get my separate microphone working, I don't mind sharing that. These things happen. We work through them, and we remember the stories. We remember the resonance of things that are going to be most impactful, and we'll accept some of these glitches because that's just human nature.
Sure. Okay, so do buyers want something different on a video call from a perspective of content? And I mean that from perhaps if we're in the office and we're just on a normal call, the call might end of, hey, this sounds great, email me it over, I'll take a look at it and I'll give it to Barry, Mary, and Sally. On a video call when people aren't able to perhaps wrap up the conversation in a nice little marketing bundle and give it to the buyer to hand around the office. Is there anything different that we should be doing with the content that we're sharing or the structure of the conversation? Or what I'm getting at is has the buying process changed? Clearly the buying process has changed, but in the very specific part of a sales conversation over video, has the buying process changed with regards to that element of it specifically?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's so much noise out there. We have video fatigue and we have email fatigue. Too many things being emailed with links and attachments. And, one of the things we're doing here at Showpad is setting up what we call a deal room. It's our shared space of if I'm packaging this stuff up for you, Will, here's the deck, the proposals, and data sheets and case studies. But let me bring it up and walk you through it. So it's not going to be many, many files in your inbox that you got to save and figure out how to forward. It's packaged up that you just get a link and now you can send that to your boss that's in marketing or your peer that's in sales operations. They know what they're going to see. And the thing I want to be mindful of as a seller that I encourage our sales teams to do, end the call early. Try to land that plane early because we all need a way to break. We all need to be able to not just go from one meeting to the next and say, you know what? I'm going to respect your time and I really want you to have a few minutes to just decompress and think about everything we talked about. So let's end this call, plan on 5 to 10 minutes early and know that we can get something scheduled later. But let's first hit all those agenda items. This isn't basketball where we're trying to get that last second shot to win the game. There is another day. So the best thing we can do is give some of that time, that little narrow window to let people stretch their legs, have a think, and come back and really think about all the things that were covered.
Sure. What do you see? This might be anecdotal as opposed to data-driven, but what do you see from a buyer perspective that salespeople often fail to do that buyers would like on a video call? And it might be summarize, it might be end the call early. What do you see from, again, I appreciate it might be anecdotal here, but what do you see buyers want more from sellers on these video calls?
I think it's a mental break, even just a pause and say, hey, you know what? Let's just take a minute here. Can you look at your calendar? We've covered a lot today. Let's maybe look and just take a minute to schedule the next meeting. Or you know what? If it's an hour-long meeting, let's just take a 5-minute break halfway throughout. Think about some of these things. Go get a water, go get a coffee, have a think about some of these things because we're not accepting of some of these awkward pauses. We're going back and forth pretty fast here on this, but I've just enjoyed, having some of these moments where I say, you know what? I'm going to tell you something compelling. Take 30 seconds, just think about what we just said here. And 30 seconds is a long time. And that way it just lets people have a bit of a mental break. So they don't always have to be on their game, on their defense if you're a buyer, thinking you're going to get sold to and marketed to, but let people have that moment just to pause, to think, to reflect and slow down. And I'm a terrible offender of this. I speak really fast, rapid fire. And so I've got a sticky note here that just says pause. Let people have that 2-3 second pause, which 3-5 seconds feels like a lifetime, 30 seconds feels like an eternity. But I think buyers would really appreciate that. And then again, ending on time or ending early, just be mindful that we're all booked up. We can see each other's calendars and there's not that moment to get up and stretch your legs. So the more that we can be mindful of that as a seller and let people have that moment, I've always appreciated that when I'm sold to. I got lots of people calling on me and the best 30-minute meetings end in 15 minutes because we hit the agenda, we got everything done, we know what we need to do. We don't need to fill it up with fluff time.
I love this idea of having clearly it's not going to be appropriate for every conversation and every sales cycle, but if we've got an hour booked into someone's diary, an hour sat chatting with someone in the same room is not the same as an hour staring at a video camera, sat up straight, and you can't even move out the way because obviously you lose the shot. Whereas an hour's meeting in an office, it might be, well, let's go and speak to Barry and we'll walk across the building and go and have a chat with them. And I know my background in medical device sales. Surgeons are always moving so quickly and so often from theatre to theatre to... I've had sales conversations with surgeons as they're getting changed, male surgeons, as they're getting changed, and they dragged me into the changing rooms to carry on chatting with them. And it not necessarily that it's awkward, but it feels like it takes a lot of attention and focus to look at a camera, at a screen. And it's, even though it seems like it shouldn't be less natural, it just is for whatever reason. It'll be body language, it'll be subtle uncertainties in, in our subconscious of what's going on here, what's going on, second guessing ourselves. Also with that slight delay that we all have via video networking and video calls, there is I almost feel I've got to wait a little bit longer and it's difficult to interrupt someone because by the time you've interrupted them, they've said 3 or 4 lines into the next sentence. So there's a cognitive load of communicating over video that is reduced if you were doing it in person. And it's probably reduced if you're doing it over the phone as well, because maybe you can let your mind wander just a little bit because you've not got to look so prim and proper on camera for wanting to not to offend people. So let's just investigate this a little bit more, and then we'll wrap up the show with this, Russell. But how would you frame up say that we've got an hour's meeting? It's the end of a long sales process. There's multiple people on the call. Would you, in the agenda, say, hey, look, we'll have a 5-minute break at 1/2 on the hour, whatever it is, just to recoup? Or would it be a 5-minute break? Would it be we'll have a conversation in the morning and wrap things up in the afternoon? What would be the best way to make this happen, and then educate the buyer on why we want to have this little bit of a break as well?
Yeah, the biggest thing is oversubscribe. If you think you can get it done in 30 minutes, maybe schedule 45 or 38 minutes, something like that. So don't feel bad about scheduling an odd hour, because that gets people's attention as well. And I'm always a fan of just doing it a little bit, read the audience. Some people, they're so busy, they may want to power through for 60 minutes because it's important, it's topical, and they don't need breaks. And other times you just need to read the room and read the energy and see, okay, am I losing people? Do we need just a quick break? And volunteer it and say, look, this is a lot. This is very heavy. Let's let everybody just put everything on pause, turn the video off, get up, stretch your legs, get a coffee, get a water, come back and have a think about some of these things. And maybe then you can leave up one of your compelling slides that you have or something like that that's kind of important. So as people walk away, they can come back and kind of digest and think about those things. But you're absolutely right. If we're in a meeting room, I could be leaning back in my chair, swiveling around a bit, moving around. We're not meant to be so sedimentary as humans, sitting here in front of the screen all day long. And so we want to get some of those elements back. But definitely read the audience, read the room, read the energy. I'm not a fan of scripting those things. Just kind of pop it in if it needs to happen. And again, it's just more natural and just understanding of your customer and their market and their time zone, where they're at.
Sure. And I guess you could almost do this to accelerate the sales process or crunch the deal time down as well, of if midway through the conversation, it's appropriate to say, hey, does it make sense to move forward with this? And the buyer says yes. We could easily just say, well, okay, let's come back in 5 minutes. We've got an hour scheduled. Let's come back in 5 minutes and we can sort out the contract. As opposed to what we always do, most salespeople do, myself included, of great, fantastic. And then you want to get off the call as quick as possible before you screw something up. But then you've added another day by the time you get in contact with them the next day, and then you've got to arrange the next meeting, this next phone call. It seems like a really interesting hack and something that could be experimented with of, again, just saying, hey, let's jump off now, let's grab a cup of tea, let's get on in 5 minutes, just wrap things up, and then we're ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, and even another add-on, I've seen this done a couple of times where if we're at the end of a discussion, there's everything I've done as a seller to try to get you engaged. I've got the buying unit there. You know what, Will, I'm going to end this call a little bit early, but let's let you all get together because it's so hard for you all to get time together because you got somebody from Seattle and London and Germany all together. That's rare. And for you guys all to deliberate and discuss what happened, it's going to be hard. It could be days or weeks, but I'm going to be mindful. You know what? I'm going to take my time and just give it to you and say, I'm going to end the call. You guys set up your own web conference, debrief on what we've just discussed, what I've shared with you. Here's the link to the deal room so you all can view instantly everything we've just talked about. And you guys can figure it out right now, whether you want to move forward or how you want to move forward. So help the buyer buy. I think that's the key, is what we're all about, creating a best buyer experience. And again, the more we can be mindful of that, and especially if we have different departments, different business units, and different geographies, if we get them all together, I would highly suggest that in that hour-long meeting, cover your bits in about 30 minutes and force that other team to make a decision, have a discussion for the rest of the 30 minutes that you're not a part of. Yep. So that could at least help them. That creates a great buyer experience.
I love it. And then all we got to do then is stick a Post-it note over our webcam and just stay tuned in to listening to them slag us off and suss out what's going on behind the scenes. Perfect, right?
Just have the call recorder keep running in the background. They won't mind that.
I'm sure the legalities of my advice there, so I'll take some of that back, but clearly don't do that. But there's definitely value in, because there's a service that you're doing there as well. Of you're enabling the buyer, aren't you? To use the kind of phrasing that we're talking about in this episode.
Yeah, no, and we've identified a problem. They have a collective interest. We don't know where they're at, but they need to discuss it. So the more that we can help them make that decision, do we all collectively understand the problem, the approach, the solution, what it's going to cost, the timeline to implement it, how they're going to realize value. Our goal isn't to talk them to death for that 60 minutes. It's just to get them collectively to the same page. And that digital deal room that we have here, that we set up in a shared space at Showpad, helps them with that. And now it's just a matter of time. That's really hard to get. And so again, the more we can just say, you know what, you all have a chat. We're going to step away. We'll remove ourselves from the meeting, delete the chat, the recording bot, and everything like that. So have that conversation. But all we've done is just be that Sherpa to kind of help them get to that point in understanding how big of a problem this is across business units.
And would you book an hour meeting knowing that you're only going to be involved for half of it and then tell the buyer at the end that you've got this extra time? Or would this be done when a meeting just finishes early? What I mean is, would you do this strategically from the outset to enable that time at the end? Or is this something that you would do, I guess, on a whim?
It could be either or, again, depending on how big the customer is, how complicated they are, how distributed the teams are, you might want to schedule that ahead of time and just say, look, we're going to book an hour, but then in your agenda, it may not be very clear and say, hey, we've covered all our bits in 30 minutes. We're going to end this call early so you all can have this time that we've already allocated. It's kind of hard to get everybody on the same schedule. Yep. Why don't you guys have a debrief at this point and let us know how we want to move forward? So we're not wasting anybody's time, or we need to try to go back and forth over emails and schedule that up. Other times you might want to just schedule that and say, look, we have 30 minutes. Transparency is fine, being open and honest and saying, we just need 30 minutes. How about we book an hour? We'll cover ours in less than 30 minutes so you all can have the rest of the time to debrief. It really just depends on how well you know the people. Sometimes that time is a gift that they'll take advantage of. Other times they may use it to get distracted and take a longer lunch break. So just depending on the buyer and how that sense of urgency is and how hard it is to get those teams together, it's really that case-by-case basis.
Sure. So that's my big takeaway from this episode, Russell. I'm going to actually experiment with this. So I'll report back to the audience. I'll report back to yourself. I'll drop you a message to see how it goes. But I think that is, we're doing a lot of, with Salesman.org, our training program over there, we're doing a lot more like corporate sales training at the moment. And a lot of it comes down to a conversation with myself, perhaps a couple of end users, a director or VP of sales, and then a few members of sales management. And usually it's me trying to encourage a conversation, but it's usually me pitching the VP of sales and everyone else kind of nodding and not wanting to agree with whatever the VP of sales says. But I feel like if I could, as I said, cut it short or appropriately time it and say, hey, you guys I'll now somehow, we'll talk about Showpad in a second, but if I can put on the screen what we've outlined, if I could get someone else even in the team to summarize it from the call itself, so they've got a very customized page or quick slide deck in front of them that they can all run through, or they can get in their inbox and process on the end of a call itself. Again, it seems like a great idea to just crush down the sales cycles. So we'll come to Showpad in a second, but I've got one final question for you. So I'm going to ask everyone that comes on the show, and that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
That's a great question, because I would encourage my younger self to appreciate sales and marketing a bit more. As an engineer, I always believed the best technology is going to win. We would code some great things. And I really never appreciated sales and marketing until I had to do it. We were a startup company. We just went to a show and set up a booth, and we just expected everybody to come, see our technology, hear about it, and just start buying. And realizing, boy, it's really noisy out there. It's noisy and it's hard to get people's attention with good marketing and good sales. And so just having that appreciation for other things that are outside of what you do. If you're in sales, really appreciate the challenges of engineering. If you're a coder, appreciate the challenges of sales and marketing, because none of this is really easy, especially now that everything's changed. We've got to adapt. And I think that's the thing that's, time has given me is that experience and that perspective that things aren't always like I think of when I'm in my clickety-clack keyboard coding for 10 years and building a great product. I've got to get somebody interested. I got to get them to buy it. And that's where sales and marketing comes in. So have that broad perspective and connect with as many different people as you can to really expose yourself to a lot of different techniques and things to make yourself a better human overall, better business person, better professional.
Cool. And I'll just wrap up with this. Is there any resources, any books, anything you read as you made this transition from developer engineer to, I guess, a sales enablement expert, as we kind of cover on the show now? Is there any books or resources that stood out to you that might be applicable for someone who is new to sales, who's listening to the show?
Yeah, I'll talk about my two favorites. One is The Trusted Advisor. It's a great, very easy to read book. When I became a consultant, just talk about how you build trust. There's a nice little equation in there about having, less self-orientation, be credible, be reliable, have a little bit of intimacy that you can develop a personal relationship. The Trusted Advisor is great there. Just how to build that trust. Very, very important, and still works today. The book has a lot of great principles. The other one, it's not a technical sales book per se, but by Daniel Pink, it's To Sell is Human. And I'm selling you now on this idea, Will, because to sell, it's human, it's natural. We're always trying to convince somebody of something. That's really what selling is all about. We may not have an official sales role and sales job with a quote and a territory, but it's just natural for salespeople to sell. So I really enjoyed that to sell as human because it breaks down a little bit of the human element of selling and developing resonance and having that rapport that it's really important as a skill. It's not just about pitching your feature and your product as the best, but getting trust and having resonance. Those two books I really enjoyed.
Perfect. Well, I'll link to both of them in the show notes of this episode over at salesman.org. And with that, Russell, tell us a little bit about Showpad and tell us where we can find out more about you as well, sir.
Absolutely. Well, Showpad, I've been a customer for quite some time. I joined the company because it really is a fantastic platform just to be the source for sales, not just their content and messaging, but learning. And then again, as we talked about, how do I practice these things one-on-one? How do I share the insights with my coach? How do I develop that so I can make sure that I'm at the ready with the knowledge and the market skill, and then I'm actually doing it. So as we record conversations and record sales calls, I'm continuously improving. Again, Showpad's that platform. I really am excited to work here to help our own sales team, but help our customers get better at this 21st century selling. So really enjoy that about everything it can do to bring to bear great marketing, great messaging, and connect with buyers and deliver the best buyer experience. And where you can find me, again, I blog at showpad.com. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn and in a lot of other sales enablement communities. So not too hard to find out there on social media.
Amazing stuff. Well, again, I'll link to all that in the show notes of this episode over at salesman.org. And with that, Russell, I enjoyed the conversation, mate. I want to thank you again for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you so much. I look forward to having a pint sometime if I'm in the London area. I'll look you up.